monarchy.
Surely the war, surely the invasion of Prague to crush the Prague Spring in 1968 can be blamed on the system called, in inverted commas, communism. Surely it can. I'm not denying that.
Yeah, but that's when
surely the
communists
one-sided
invade
civil war,
the capitalist countries
surely the
specifically to
one-sided
destroy
civil
them,
war
because they're
by
capitalists.
Stalin and his entourage against opponents in Russia. But you see what's going on here.
No.
I am admitting what you are saying about communism. You are denying what I am saying about capitalism,
Okay,
which automatically follows.
No, but listen, what you're saying is, because capitalist countries
Because
were
Britain
at
was
war
capitalist,
with each other,
Germany was
that's
capitalist,
the fault of capitalism.
Germany was capitalist,
doesn't work like that.
France was capitalist, Britain was capitalist. In none of those countries did the mass of did the men and women have universal suffrage. They were ruled over by bureaucrats, the military, elites, the land-owning aristocracy, and the monarchs. And they sent the workers to kill each other in Flanders and in Russia. Now tell me, what did they fight about? We're told in the history books in England that the First World War was about Belgium.
Yes.
Because Belgium wasn't independent anymore. But was Africa independent?
No.
Was India independent? Was China independent? Was South America genuinely independent? We had colonies, we had empires. And everybody knows, if you bother to read your history books properly, the Germans were accused of being the barbarians because they challenged Britain's rule of the world. That's why. Germany, you remember? Holbeck, was he called? He wanted a place in the sun for Germany.
Well, exactly, the
What did
Germans
it mean
wanted
by
some colonies like the British
But
had.
Britain already had colonies.
Huh?
Britain already had colonies.
Yes, the Germans
Did they
wanted
treat the
colonies
colonial
too.
people like human beings?
Listen, you do know that
Did
the
they
British,
treat
that the
the
British
colonial
ended
people like
slavery
human
in their
beings?
colonies, and then they forced the other colonial powers to end slavery. You do know about that, don't you?
So that makes them slavery
It
didn't
doesn't
exist.
cancel the terrible things they did, but
makes
they
us
did
good.
do some good things. You can't deny that.
Slavery.
Now, this
there's a
argument
very
is
simple
not about
there's a
how they
simple
treated
reason.
the people
Just
in the
to come on
colony.
to the same question,
This argument
to
is that you
clarify
said that
the
First World
logic
War
behind the argument.
was
One
because
sec,
of
one sec,
capitalism,
let me do
and it
slavery.
has nothing
Let me
to do
deal with
with
slavery
that.
first of all. Then we'll come on to that.
Okay, go ahead.
Why did the British oppose the slave trade? Initially, they supported the slave trade. They were the bulwark of the slave trade. Once they'd accumulated sufficient wealth themselves, then they said nobody else should be able to do the same thing we did. Nobody else should be able to emulate our rise. And so they began to say, we are against the slave trade. In fact, even in the American Civil War, where there were two sides of theory fighting, one for slavery, one against slavery, in reality, what we had was the slave owners were considered by the northern capitalists in the United States to be enemies of capitalism. That's why they had to be fought. That's why slavery had to be abolished, because slavery was an inefficient system of production. If you grab a human being, if you grab a human being and make them work for you, you have to pay not only for their food, clothing and shelter, you also have to maintain them. You have to look after them day and night. You have to make sure they don't run away. If you've got a wage worker, you don't employ them day and you don't house them, you don't feed them. All you do is pay them a wage, they come to work, and at the end of the day they piss off.
Right.
Therefore it's cheaper and more efficient
How does that
to
make
employ
the First
people
World
as
War
workers
the fault of capitalism?
rather than slaves. That is why British capitalism, the strongest capitalism in 1818, that's why Britain suddenly turned against the slave trade, because capitalism considered slavery to be inefficient as a method of production, as a method of accumulation. That's why they opposed the slave trade. Yes, they couch it in moral terms. It wasn't Paul falls from a horse and discovers an awakening. On the contrary, there were interests involved.
Yes.
Now, coming back to the First World War, the celebration in a couple of weeks' time of the anniversary of the end of the First World War. The First World War was a war between the powerful countries of Europe over who would dominate the world. So, by the way, was the Second World War, also a capitalist war. Now, people make out in England what they do is they put a big stamp.
It was a war of interests. It was interests of
What is
different
interest?
countries.
What
They
countries?
wanted to become more powerful.
If
It
the
happens
people
throughout
in that
history.
country, if
Listen,
the
are you
people,
about to blame every single
the
war in
people
history
in the
on
country,
capitalism?
no.
Every
But
war was fought because
wars
of
in
interest.
modern times,
People have different interests. They fight for their interests.
But
They
in
fight
a
for
society-
power. That's how war is.
In a society
Done.
dominated by production for profit, in other words, in a capitalist society,
what?
war is generally fought for the interests of capitalism. In other words, for the expansion of their property, the expansion of their profits, and the expansion of the terrain of influence.
It's not fought for capitalism. It's for their own personal interest.
Well, right, personal. But
It's
then,
not-
but I ask you this. I ask
for
you
their
this.
personal.
If
for
the
the
people-
British fought for the
if the
British
people
interests,
in Britain-
the Germans fought for the German interests.
Let me try and clarify.
It was
The
not for capitalism.
You are saying that the nation fought.
destroyed the economy.
The gentleman
world
is saying-
wars destroyed the economies
True.
of all of Europe. And saying it's all about capitalism, Europe was smashed after the First
My
World
friend,
War economically.
my friend, there is
In the
nothing-
Second World War,
there is
it wasn't-
nothing
excuse
in
me,
capitalism.
It wasn't about economics.
trying to answer you.
It was about ideology. It was about war of
What is
aggression. It
ideology?
was about Hitler trying to take over Europe and people.
Why did he
pushing
want to
back
take
against
over
it.
Europe?
I think for racial reasons, actually. I think it was racialist.
My friend, what racial issues? You think the British didn't treat the Indians like animals?
Well, they didn't say Indians
the
are
British didn't treat the
Untermensch and we
Africans
have
like
to
animals?
exterminate
I
them.
believe
Sorry?
the Second
British
World
didn't
War
say,
was a war of
the
On the
Indians
contrary,
should be all
during the
exterminated.
Second World War, 3 million people were starved to death by the British in West Bengal. 3 million people. So that's as many people as died in Auschwitz.
3 million
3
people.
million people in West Bengal starved to death deliberately by the British to export food to the British troops. So the
Then
argument
it
doesn't
wasn't
wash.
done deliberately to
It
kill
was
them.
done deliberately.
It wasn't done
Not
to
only
kill
that,
them.
if you go and get a book, 20th Century British Empire,
No,
you
if
look
you-
inside the
listen.
books, you will find pictures from the beginning of the 20th century of Indian freedom fighters put in front of cannons in the 1850s, and in the 20th century put on crucifixes in the 20th century and allowed to burn to death in the sun. That's under British rule in India in the 20th century. The Mau Mau in the 1960s were put in concentration camps by the British.
The who?
1 million
1950s.
in the
The
60s
Mao's
and
followers.
50s. The Mau Mau.
Maybe you should talk about Mao
In
Zedong, how
Malaya,
he killed 80 million people.
out of 10 million population in 1957, 1 million, a tenth of the population of Malaya, were in concentration camps controlled by the British.
Concentration.
Concentration camps. Concentration camps were invented by the British.
Oh, really?
Yes, in the Boer
What
War.
about the Gulag?
In the Boer War.
What about the Gulag? Did the British invent
The
the
Gulag
Gulag?
was copied from
Sure,
the British
sure
by,
it was. Of
by,
course it
by
was.
the Russians.
Of course it was.
Yes.
You know, it's all the fault
Gulag
of the
didn't
British.
exist
The
then.
British did everything. The British
didn't-
killed the 80
I didn't
million
say that.
Chinese
I'm
under Mao. The
describing
British
to you.
killed the 20 million Soviets under Stalin.
No,
The British did everything,
no.
man.
But what I
No, but we did
whereas I accepted
invent concentration camps.
Sorry?
I said no, but we did invent concentration.
No, you didn't.
Whereas
Yes, we
I
did. No, you
accepted
didn't.
and attempted to explain the dynamics in the Soviet Union, the instruments of repression, I accepted all of that. So you don't have an argument against that for that. You might say, oh, you still support that. That's up to
He's
you.
South African.
That's just the
Ask him where a
viewpoint.
concentration
But in
camp
terms of the reality of what happened, I was trying to explain to you what that reality was.
So wait, what
now,
you're
the
trying
First
to prove
World War
to
was
me
explained.
that the British were not the good guys.
Britain,
If that's
Britain,
so, then you can stop right
Britain
now. I'm not considering
was
anybody
not
as the good guy.
I'm not saying the good guys were bad guys.
You're showing
I'm
me
trying
the
to
flaws
describe
of
the
the
world
British.
and the way it works.
You're defending socialism. And I'm
I'm
against
explain-
this kind of socialism because it killed much more people, many more people than capitalism.
But if you come to my meeting and you don't agree with socialism, and I agree with socialism, that argument can be over in 2 seconds.
Oh, can it?
Right?
How?
But the depth of the
How?
argument, explanations from different viewpoints about the same questions, provide the ammunition on which you found your argument if you want to raise an argument above base level A. Base level A is, I say I'm for socialism. Base level B, you say, or base level A is, you say socialism doesn't work. Argument finished, right?
No, it's
if
not.
on the other side, you want to know how to understand the world using a method of thinking about the world, whether you agree with that method or not, it can be true that a method can provide you with a tool of analysis
that's
to
one
understand
You know
whether
what's
you
actually
agree with
going
it or
on
not.
here?
One
What's actually
For
going on
example-
here?
But there
For
are
example-
other interpretations.
For your own information.
There are other
What's
interpretations.
actually
For your
going
own
on here
information.
One
is that you're saying
interpretation. There
socialism
are
is
other
good. I'm
interpretations.
telling you, socialism is bad because it did these different things, and you're telling me, oh, but the British did some bad things too.
No, that's not what
an
I said.
argument. Yes,
On the
that is what
contrary,
you said.
you
I
said
was
that.
talking about socialism.
You said that for
and
one
you
simple
started
reason.
talking about the British. I
Because
wasn't even mentioning the British.
Let me clarify.
Okay,
I
clarify.
explained that the First World War was a capitalist war. I didn't base it on nation. I said it's a capitalist
Said
war.
it was because of
A
capitalism.
war between capitalist states.
Yes.
In other words, a war run by capitalist interests.
Including the Soviet Union. State capitalism. That's what Lenin
Capitalist-
said.
Soviet Union didn't
At the
exist in
time
the
of the
First
First
World
World War,
Lenin said it
there
was
was
state
no
capitalism.
Soviet Union.
The Soviet
At the time
Union
of the
didn't
First
exist in
World
the
War,
First World
there
War.
was no Soviet
Destroyed by
Union.
Lenin.
There was
Destroyed
no.
it.
1917.
All the different Soviet
I'll come on
councils.
to that another
Petrograd.
another
The
issue.
Bolsheviks
I'm
were
happy to
There were
discuss
socialists
that.
here.
That's not the issue we're discussing.
My apologies. Go on.
Happy to
Go on,
discuss
go on,
it.
I'm sorry.
Having discussed the character, what I would consider to be the class character of the First World War, then you went on to say, actually, the First World War was about nations fighting each other for
Yes.
their interests. That's how we got onto Britain. I was not saying this was about nations. I was saying this was about systems of organising production, which happen to exist in certain nations and not in others, dominated by those countries. And therefore I was dealing with systems. You tried to deal with countries. That's how we got in the conundrum of Britain.
But that's
Now-
how wars are fought. One country
Yes, but
has
I
one
said this.
interest,
I
another
said
country
this in
has another
response.
interest.
Was
They fight
Britain,
to see which
was
one wins.
Britain a society run by the people?
What do you mean run by
First
the people?
World War, was it run by the people?
No society can be
Was
run by
France
the
run by the
people.
people?
This run by
Was
the people
Germany run by
bullshit
the
that you're
people?
spewing around here is complete
Yeah,
bullshit,
ancient-
man. I'm
ancient
sorry.
Athens.
Look,
exactly.
the people
So it's
are-
run by the
pe-
capitalists.
people always choose certain people to rule them. Certain leaders
But if
to
you don't have the
represent
right to
their
vote, you can't
interests.
choose them.
Certain leaders to
If you
represent
don't,
their interests.
how many years has the right to vote
Whether they
existed?
choose them or those people gain power by other means.
Universal suffrage
is
in
another
Britain.
discussion.
When was it introduced?
Sorry?
Universal suffrage. When was it introduced?
What do you mean? You mean
When
democracy?
was
1911
universal
for men,
suffrage?
1918 for women, I
No,
believe.
1870s.
Sorry?
1911 for
men.
men, I believe.
1928 for women.
I'm sorry.
And
yes.
even that was limited.
Oh,
Even that was limited.
No, I think women under the age
Now,
of
1918, they're talking about middle class women. So it's not universal suffrage. So, in other words, after the end of the war, that's when the vote was granted.
Yes.
So, you cannot therefore argue that the nation fought the war. They didn't.
Yes, they
The
did.
nation had no say over anything.
the nation wouldn't have survived for 4 years without the support of the people.
I'm
The
not
nations
saying, I'm not
throughout
saying you
history
can't rally
are the
people
interests
behind.
of the people
I
in
am
power.
not saying
Throughout
you cannot
history.
rally people behind.
There's no evidence of that.
As states,
Oh, you've
you
gotta be
can't rally
joking.
people
The first
behind.
Throughout
First
the
World
entire course of
What? We
history,
kept
the interest of
an
the nation
entire
is
nation
the
under
interest of
arms
the people
for
in
4
power.
years.
Whether it is
Without-
the
I'm
interest,
sorry.
it's
I'm
never
sorry.
the interest
But
of the
then you
people
negate your
themselves.
entire argument.
No, I'm
If
not.
your argument
Study it
is
carefully, there
that communism is an
So did
alien
I.
form
Believe-
imposed
Perhaps
upon the
you
people,
don't have the monopoly
then you
of
can't
knowledge.
argue that same
There are other
argument you're
people that
making
have studied
if
as
you
well.
say that they
There
didn't
are
have
other people
democracy
that have read
there.
books.
We had no democracy in
I'm not protecting democracy as it's
1866.
perfect.
No, I
We neither
didn't
had
say
the right
that.
to vote for
What I
men
said was,
nor
without
for women before 1866 and the Reform League riots in Hyde Park.
Oh, I
It
agree.
secured
I completely
the
agree
right
with
to
that.
right to speak and the right to vote for
the support of
a
the people
majority
came about
of
through
men.
propaganda.
Right?
You
So
will admit
before
that, surely.
1866, how
support of
could
the
any
people came about
war
through
be
propaganda.
considered to be a war of the people if no people had the right to say anything?
No war was a war of the people. No
just
wars
said it was. You
were
said they all
chosen
were.
by the
Second
people.
World War was.
You said
It's a
they all
nation,
were. What do you
nation,
mean by
country,
nation?
a country. Look,
What do
the
you mean
decisions
by a
of the country
What do
are
you
not
mean by
necessarily
what do you
the
mean by
decisions of the
country?
people.
What do you mean by country?
Trench and
Where
bench.
does it start and where does it end?
Women
Fucking
working
hell,
in the
man.
factories.
Do you
during
not
the
know what
World
a
War,
country is?
I'm
keeping
asking
the
you
war
to
machine
clarify.
going,
Dude, a
men
na-
at the trenches fighting the war.
Why?
To keep for freedom
it was
for
voluntary.
their country.
For their country, but where were they fighting in Flanders?
Sorry, I was talking about the
They were
Second World War
fighting in
that-
France.
What?
The British soldiers were fighting in France
So what?
for their country. Right?
To be fair, it was voluntary. You
Yes,
can't,
it was
You
voluntary,
can't force.
yes.
I mean,
My friend, what does that have to do with it?
what he's saying.
If
that,
I whip up everybody here to go and attack that man over there, does that mean it's right?
no, of course, but it's still voluntary. That's what he
Well,
meant.
whether
by
it's
the people
voluntary or
going
not
to
is
war.
irrelevant.
The government used propaganda.
In fact,
to
it's not
frighten
true.
everyone, but it
Right.
still was the people.
Right.
No, I mean-
People
Well-
did go to war.
Well,
The
the
South
fact
is-
that you can whip people up to go and kill people is hardly a laudatory point for the formation of a
you're right.
nation.
Well, that's how socialism
you're
works.
claiming that-
That's how the
No.
Soviet Union
That
works.
is not how
That-
socialism
that-
works.
That's how
You're a
That's not what we're
Mao
discussing now.
worked.
You're a
That's not
liar.
what we're discussing
No, no.
now.
But you're
I'm not
claiming
denying
That's how
You're
Mao
the
China
one who's
works.
denying it.
They whip out the people.
You're
Oh, you know,
saying-
these guys
you're
are the
saying
capitalists. We need
that
to
there's
kill them, and they
something
kill
in
them.
the nature of capitalism.
80 million,
works.
80 million people in
You
China,
are saying-
20 million
My
people in
friend,
the Soviet
how many
Union.
people died in the First World War?
The First World War.
Yes.
15 million.
Well, less than 20 million.
Right, and I ask you this.
far more in the Second World
What was the
40
main
million.
force?
Voluntary
What
mass
was the
slaughter by
main
capitalism.
factor
And no one talks about that.
which led to
Yeah,
the
well,
Russian
what was
Revolution?
it then if it wasn't about capitalism?
Because the Russian peasants were treated like shit.
It was.
Where?
By the fucking Russian royalists.
How were they treated like shit?
Because they didn't care about their peasants.
How
And
was
the
that
pe-
manifested in
Fascism is a variant of
1917?
capitalism, isn't it?
What the fuck are you? Do you even know the Russian
War, my
history?
friend. The First World War caused the revolution.
It's true.
That was part of the reason. That was part of the reason.
You think
the Russians
100
were
million
against
peasants
joining
sitting
the
in the
war.
middle of the fields in Russia would make a revolution. They make a revolution because they were turned into an army
Listen,
to
when,
go and fight
when
against
Lenin
Germany.
went to Russia, he actually changed his ideology slightly
When what?
from the proletarians to the peasants.
Yes.
Because Russia didn't have a
point
very
being
big,
this, though. The point
didn't have a
being
very
this.
big body of proletarians.
was
but it
the
had
massacre.
lots of peasants.
It was the massacre of millions of Russian
How many?
peasants,
Millions.
in the First World War that led to the revolution. It caused the
No,
revolution.
it's
It
the
was
economic
part of the
strains
reason.
on the country.
So
It was
you
not
see,
the only
who
reason.
want to
Country to
blame?
collapse.
And then
And that
after,
led to the revolution.
after the revolution, what happened?
The economic system broke
What
down,
happened?
and it caused the,
What
caused the collapse
happened
of the
after
states.
the revolution
They
in
couldn't
Russia?
The
afford
Soviets
to keep
took
the
the power.
soldiers in.
Sorry? The Soviets took. What happened then? What did Britain do? What did France do?
Archangel.
What did Germany do?
They sent a
What
load
did
of
America
soldiers.
do? What did Czechoslovakia do? What did they do?
What did
when the
many
revolution-
countries inside of the Russian
Sorry?
Empire do? They tried to divide themselves from the Russian Empire. And what did the Soviets
friend.
do? They
No, my
still
friend.
conquered
My friend.
them.
My friend, you didn't
Even
get it.
though they wanted to
I said
separate
to you,
themselves.
the war caused the revolution. Right? The first
It wasn't
war,
the only
which
cause.
I said was
the people
predates
lived
the revolution,
like
doesn't
shit.
it?
The people lived like
Second,
shit
second,
under the
second.
Russian Empire.
What happened after the revolution in Russia?
The Soviets took power in Moscow.
14
and the
countries
Soviets,
invaded Russia. 14
yeah,
countries.
they were supporting the whites, which were the nobles. They were the
Exactly.
they were the
So
whites
those who
and they
had
were
sent,
the reds.
those who sent the peasants to die, the nobles, when they were overthrown, they were then backed by America, by Britain, by France, by Germany, with an army of invasion.
Yeah, because they knew
Which
that
went to
fucking
Russia with
communism would never
14
work.
armies
They
to
didn't want to
overthrow the
have a
Soviet
communist
government.
country in their border.
Exactly. So your potted history is inaccurate.
Potted history.
You must start the history of the Soviet Union.
What are you talking about?
Start the history of
What
the
are
Russian
you talking
Revolution
about? We are not actually
by looking
disagreeing.
at the First World War.
We are not actually disagreeing.
He's
All we're
disagreeing with
disagreeing on is on the motives. I'm saying the same
He's
thing.
disagreeing with me. On the contrary, It's a completely counterposed point of view. Believe
is
me,
it?
I know.
No,
I've been speaking with
well,
this
yeah,
guy
because you
for
protect the
15
Soviets,
years,
and
or
I don't
5
protect
years.
them.
No, I'm not protecting.
Yeah,
I'm
you are.
describing the process which happened.
Yeah, dude, you
A
bring the
historical
fucking picture of Karl
process.
Marx and you keep it here as if he were your god. Pray to Karl Marx.
No God. I don't have a God.
Oh, of course
I
not.
don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. I don't
well,
believe in
of
God.
course you are.
Simple
Of
as
course
that.
you
Well, you say that because it suits your interest to say that. But of course, you can't accept me giving my opinion about what
No,
I
I
think.
can't accept you.
you're a
See,
capitalist.
I
if I
can't
say I'm an
accept
atheist,
you
you
defending
deny-
socialism because it doesn't work.
You can accept me believing in socialism. You can argue against it.
Of course I can.
Which I hope you do. And when you do, I argue against your argument. That's what
the
I've been
thing
trying
is,
to do.
you're not giving any good arguments, man.
Well, I gave the argument. You see, your argument initially, let's go over it once again.
No, your argument is
Your argument
you show me
initially
some
was-
flaws in capitalism. I tell you, okay, socialism and communism did this, and you tell me, but capitalism did this. That's not an argument.
Well-
That's not defending your point of view.
I'm not trying to defend my point of view.
just attacking
I
another
was trying
point
to
of view.
explain the dynamics which lead to certain processes. That's what Marxism provides me with after 35 years of studying it. It provides me with a method to understand the world and to explain it.
There are
Now,
other methods, and there are
35
other
years of
and
studying
there are
it,
other
and you
methods.
still don't
I
understand that
believe
it doesn't
they
work.
are inadequate to explain the social system we live under.
And I believe your
And I will
interpretation
illustrate
is
that, for
inaccurate.
example, with
Inaccurate.
Look at all the
I'll
social
illustrate that with
socialist
some
countries
simple
that
examples from
existed.
today. Instead of going over the First World War, although it's the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War,
Well, you're calling
next
it a
month,
capitalist war.
It was a capitalist war. The first capitalist war, better said, what they call the first imperialist war. A battle between the leading capitalist states over who plunders the world.
Oh, really?
Yes.
What about the war between the Roman Empire and the Sassanid Empire? It's a war between
The-
two empires.
These were
Right.
empires, but those empires were not based on wage slavery. They were not based upon capitalist production. Those were slave societies, in which, for example, in Pompeii, 40% of the population were slaves. That's the foundation of the socio-economic system that
At the
existed
point
at
when
that
the
time.
Romans were at war
Therefore,
with the
the
Sassanids, they
Romans, what they
already
did was-
had Christianity as their official religion.
And they
which
had
means,
slavery.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. It was because of Christianity that the Eastern Roman Empire stopped practicing slavery.
Began to get rid of some slavery. Didn't get rid of
During
slavery.
the Emperor
Slavery
Constantine,
even existed
the Emperor
in Britain.
Constantine
In Britain, in the-
promoted Christianity and he ended slavery.
Okay. Well, I didn't know that particular war, but okay, I'll give you that. If that's the case, I'll give you that because I didn't know. I was referring to the social system guiding the character of the wars. If the Soviet Union went to war, for example, as it did with China, that's not a capitalist fighting a capitalist. Those are two regimes based on a particular social formation fighting each other.
Yeah, but you can't say
And
it's
therefore
because
when
of
you say-
communism. It's just because their
Why is that
interests. That war is not because
What
of
interests
communism.
are they?
You know, for example,
Are
Russia
the
wants a
inter-
city
but
that
if that's
China
the
wants
if
to.
that's the case,
And they
which you're
get a-
saying,
they start a
if
war.
what you're saying is the case, then that negates your entire argument.
Oh, does it? How?
Yes, because that means that there's no distinction between capitalism and communism. Everything's just interests. And therefore,
There is a
if
distinction
China
in
fights
terms of
Russia,
ideology.
it makes no difference. It's just like France fighting,
Wars are fought
fighting Germany.
because of interests.
Right.
Because
so
of different interests.
Interests are specific to a social formation. That's why I said in a slave society, it'll be a war around slave control. In a society based on capitalism and imperialism, it'll be an imperialist war. And in a Stalinist state, it'll be a Stalinist war. They have characteristics unique to the method of production, organization, distribution, and exchange in the system.
Okay.
So each system has its own features of the war. If a war break or if a conflict breaks out at Speaker's Corner between Muslims and the far right, there are specific characteristics to that. If on the other side a conflict breaks out between transsexuals and
Muslims.
genuine and females, as it has also at Speaker's Corner, that's got a different characteristic to the conflict between the Muslims or Islamic fundamentalists and the far right. There are different characteristics to it.
Well, of course.
Right, so what I was saying was wars have different characteristics based on the social system they're founded on. That's why I called the First World War the first imperialist, the first capitalist war, global capitalist war. That's why I say Stalinism, that's what I define it as, has unique characteristics to it which distinguish it from capitalism. Merely to say interest is to wash away the distinctions, and therefore the distinction between capitalism and socialism falls away. If on the other side you accept those distinctions, which you do, because you're constantly arguing there's something wrong with my argument, as unique from your argument.
Because
which
you're
is
saying that it
pro-capitalist.
was the first imperial war. What do you call the war between Napoleon and the British Empire? They were both empires.
Yes.
It was an imperial war.
Yes, yes,
Or the
yes,
7 Year
yes,
War.
yes.
The 7 Year War.
That's
was
true.
exactly
That's true.
What
You
are we
could say.
talking about?
That was
And in the
about
National
empires as
Army
well.
Museum, they called it the First World War because it had a global terrain of operation. However, the distinction lies in this, in my opinion, although there is an argument to stretch as far back as that, but I don't think it's valid, and that is that the general mode of production, method of production, dominating the society, in my view and in Marx's framework, is how you characterize a society. You don't characterize, in my opinion, you shouldn't characterize a society by what they call themselves, calls itself Christian, calls itself absolute monarchy, calls itself parliamentary democracy, calls itself Iranian Revolutionary Republic, calls itself German Federal Republic, calls itself liberal and democratic. But what is the essence of the system?
It's a war.
How does
It's an
it actually
entire
function?
nation under arms, and that's why the First World War is
As
different.
if there are no leaders in an army.
What? What's your point there? What are you saying?
point
You're looking
is this.
meaningfully in my eyes. and saying that.
Meaningfully
What-
like this.
What do you mean?
When the
What
First
does
World
that mean?
War ended,
You had an entire nation under arms. That's why the First World War is different from the Napoleonic
So why
War.
did the First World
Jonah,
War
please,
end?
please.
Why did the
thing is,
First World War
Napoleonic
end?
Wars, their armies might be 100,000. In the First World War, it was millions of men under
the funny
arms.
thing is,
It was entire
and the funny
nation,
thing is,
everybody under war.
in the Napoleonic Wars, often the army fighting on your behalf was from another country.
Yes, it was. Yes, yeah.
So it wasn't the whole nation under arms, was it?
No, but that's
It
the point.
was-
That's my
it was
point.
employed
Napoleonic War
killers,
was not a nation
Mercenaries,
under arms. Yes.
mercenaries
Yeah, but
employed by
we're
powerful
talking about the
interests.
First World War,
Supposed
and
no,
that
you were
was
talking
an
about the
entire
Napoleonic War.
nation under arms.
Now,
it was the
I
first
ask you
mass
this.
industrial.
And then
state
what happened?
countries,
And
that's
then
why it was so
what
terrible.
happened?
The economies were completely destroyed of many countries. We had decades and
war
decades of
How did the
economic
First
chaos.
World War end?
Implosion. Germany imploded.
Imploded?
Yes,
What
it didn't
happened
lose the
in
war.
Germany?
It didn't lose the war.
What happened in Germany?
Revolutions, almost revolution.
What was the revolution about?
Strikes, mass strikes.
Why?
Because people, after 4 years, they'd had enough.
Enough of what?
War.
Thank you. In other words, although it was claimed that the whole people supported the war, and initially
But
many of
they
them
did. For 4
and
years they did.
Initially, many of them did.
For
But
4
an army
years.
in the trenches is no different from a Stalinist dictatorship, except you have guns at your head all the time. If you don't fight, they kill you. Simple as that. So the idea, and in fact, you know the story, Christmas 1914, German and British soldiers played football together. What did the British army do? What did the German army do? They
shell
banned all Christmas celebrations.
And shelled the battlefields
Yes,
every Christmas
because
day afterwards.
the biggest fear was not that the Germans would attack, but there will be internal revolution against the officers, against the generals, against that hierarchy of power that sent the people to kill each other. The First World War was a war by the capitalists to expand their power using the workers, just the same as McDonald's uses the workers today to produce burgers, so they use the workers in war to produce killing.
No, it's a war of competing interests, as you've said.
Whose interests? If the workers
Compete-
rose up at the end
national
of the war,
interests.
if the workers rose up, if the
National
workers
interests.
firstly had no right to vote, secondly, if their so-called national interests were represented by the elite, thirdly, if their national interests corresponded with plundering and robbing the world, so the people of the whole world were being robbed, starved, and driven into penury by British capitalism, you can hardly call it in the interests of the British workers. And by the way, at the end of the First World War, Winston Churchill himself said, a revolutionary wave is sweeping Europe, we do not know if we'll be able to contain it.
Oh yes, he said that.
Because it takes experience, decades of experience, for the masses to accumulate the sense that for 2 million years they have produced things from hand axes up until aircraft and bombs. And yet, after 2 million years, they still have nothing. Their ancestors
That's not
bequeathed
true.
them nothing.
We're all more affluent.
42%
We're
of the
all more
population of
affluent than our
London,
grandparents.
42% of the
got more than our
population of
parents.
London
We got
have
more
less
than
than
our
£100 in
grandparents.
savings.
No, we haven't.
Yes, we have.
Yes, we do.
60%,
Look,
60%, one sec, 60% of the population of Britain have less than £1,000 in savings. How can that be after 2 million years of human existence that people in London, one of the wealthiest cities in the world, have less than 42% less than £100. 2 million years of our ancestors making things. Yet we
we've got-
own nothing.
Yeah, but we've got cars and
Cars.
and clothes. And
You said wealth.
mobiles.
My friend.
You said
friend,
wealth.
my
Half a
friend.
minute. You said wealth. Now, my grandfather, he brought up 12 kids, 2 died, 14, 2 died, 12 kids he brought up. He could clothe them, he could have a very big house, he was only a carman, and, could you do that today? Could you bring up 12 kids?
Depends on where I was.
There is a
Well,
flip,
in London, in Surrey Docks, or Surrey Keys.
there is a flip side to this
Well,
argument.
probably
Illustrates
not
the
in
point.
Surrey
I'm
docks
making.
because it's really, really expensive. But times change, things are different.
Okay.
We have different kinds
Okay,
of wealth.
anywhere in London.
We have
could you-
electricity. Your father,
is a-
with the
Right
greatest
now,
this
respect,
thing is not
probably
supporting
didn't
having
have,
many
didn't have
children.
There is a flip
refrigerators,
side to this
didn't have a
argument which
television.
clarifies what my point is. None of these instruments existed for us 20 years ago. 1995, I had a mobile phone this big, and it was a clunker, and it ran out of electricity in no time.
It's a
And
brick.
hardly anybody had a phone, mobile phone. Now everyone's not only got a mobile phone, they've got a camera, they've got a video recorder, they've got instantaneous internet connection. You've got access on this machine to more knowledge than anyone in 19th century Britain had, than anyone in 1950s Britain had, and in fact than anyone in 1980s Britain had. More access on one click of a button to the entire world's collective knowledge over 2 million years exists in your pocket.
And yet
So we're
much
richer.
ignorance.
And
We're richer.
yet, between 2008 and today, living standards have fallen in Britain. Fallen. Not only in Britain, but the United States and most of Europe.
Would you consider
it's
us
not
living
deliberate. It's the
standards?
method of organising production whereby the capitalists seek to deliberately, in that sense, yes, deliberately maintain their profit rate by reducing and containing the wages of the workers. That's why I explain the world in those terms. We advance with science, we advance with technology faster than ever before in human history. And
You
yet
still
you're
can't
happy
afford 12
with a
kids.
duffel coat.
Is there any?
sorry,
This
Every
is a
single
working.
country, every
this is a
single
work-
empire in the world
I was an electrician.
has had its good
and
times,
before I
and then it
retired,
died off.
And this was my work
It
coat.
dissolved.
I was a worker, mate.
Let
This
him
is a
say
worker's
something.
jacket.
It's how human
I'd like
societies
to- I'd
work.
like to-
Telling
Let him
me
say- let him
this is
say
a
something
worker's
first.
I'd like to
jacket.
correct two things. First of all, compared to the Telegraph, what the Telegraph did to the world in terms of bringing the world closer together.
I was
far
specific. I was very specific about what I said.
Okay, fair enough. But compared to the phone, you say that we're at the fastest level of development today. Compared to the Industrial Revolution, it's nothing.
It's not.
But then, second of all, okay, fine. You
You can
disagree with
argue.
that.
You can argue
disagree with
that. I don't believe
Second
it's
of all,
correct.
you said something a few weeks ago. You said in Pakistan and India, most people on mobile phones.
True.
I looked up the statistics about this and found out how many people connected to the internet. It's like less than 1/5 Pakistanis, and it's less than 1 out of. It's like something like.
I will
less,
check that
less
statistic.
Than, less than 10% of Indians.
Anytime you
so
get
I think
up,
you're exaggerating a little bit.
Anytime you get up and speak, you can make mistakes in what you say. I'm not an encyclopedia. I don't have a permanent Wikipedia reference. However, if someone corrects me and I'll check up the data, I will
You
accept
may
that
think
correction.
you may think I'm being
If you
pedantic.
correct
You
me,
may think
no,
I'm being
I don't
pedantic,
think you're being
but I'm not.
pedantic. However, I have been in Pakistan. I've been in India as well. Yes, I haven't been into the deepest countryside in India or Pakistan, which is probably where what you're talking about has relevance. In all the urban areas, everyone's got a mobile phone. That I could qualify it in that respect. In all the urban areas in India, everyone's got a mobile phone
Why are
as
these
well.
countries so
And
ignorant
if you
then?
take, for example, they were just examples. I was pointing out that there is a global interconnectivity today that has never before existed in human history. Yes, the telegraph had an important role to change. Yes, there were innovations at the time of the Industrial Revolution that had important changes. But I believe it is incorrect to minimise them in a comparative sense, because today we are on the cusp of fundamental revolutionary changes in science and technology, which will affect the lives of everybody on Earth, and do already affect the lives of everybody.
Automate all the
The
jobs.
point, however, was something different. That point was to contrast the advance in technology and science and culture to the actual advance in living standards and the conditions of the people.
You're right about that.
That's the fundamental contradiction I'm trying to illustrate. Whether I use one or other bad example that's factually slightly incorrect, well, maybe. The central crux of the argument doesn't require even the specific reference to a technical instrument.
It's
We've got
neoliberalism.
things
It's
that
refer-
our
class
parents
war.
wouldn't dream of having.
Class war's always been
Things
around.
We've got things now that wasn't dreamed of.
Yes, but
by
the
our
point is
parents
this.
or our
If we
grandparents.
have things that were not dreamed of, why have they not brought corresponding improvements to the lives of the people?
I would suggest they have. I would suggest we're more affluent. I would actually suggest we're wealthy. That gentleman might disagree with me.
Okay.
I think we
I
are
do.
better.
I will try to end on this point. Bertolt Brecht, he once wrote a little poem. I'll paraphrase it. He said, he was around the beginning of the 20th century. And he said, with my father, I watched the first aeroplane cross the sea. Sorry, I saw the first motor car. With my son, I saw the first aircraft cross the Atlantic. With my grandson, I saw the nuclear bomb explode. So the speed at which things advance often leads people to mistakenly believe that because things are advancing a little bit in their life, that corresponds to general advance. The question I'm saying is this: is the exponential speed of development requires a response corresponding to that exponential speed. So if technology advances, so robotics, nanotechnology, biotechnology, for example, we can produce from the stem cell of a feather, of a chicken, we can produce in theory and in practice chicken breasts to feed the whole of humanity, just from one feather. Now, given that technology in my hand has greater access to knowledge than any library in the world in the 1850s. Oh, sorry, in the 1980s, sorry, not the 1850s. This exponential advance should meet with a corresponding exponential advance in living
But
standards.
capitalism
In
will
the
make that happen. Capitalism
Does it? Where's
Yes,
the
it
evidence?
will.
Where's
It
the
will.
evidence? In fact, the opposite is the case.
I point you towards
The working
Tesco's.
week
I point
has
you
been
towards
increased.
Sainsbury's. Full supermarket shops full of food,
Full of food, yes.
made because of capitalism. Lovely capitalism.
Full of
that
food,
gives
yes.
us plenty
But
and
the question
affluence
is
and
this.
lots.
The question is this. Do the workers in Sainsbury's work less than 5 years ago? Less than 10 years ago?
No.
Less than 20 years ago? I guarantee you they don't.
No, I agree.
Are their wages higher than 10 years ago? I guarantee you they're not. Because capitalism is a system whereby the production for profit dominates, and therefore the demand to drive down wages, to increase the working day, to increase the working life is a constant pressure on a global scale within capitalism. And for that reason, capitalism, instead of bringing the fruits of technology to the benefit of the people, capitalism seeks to use that technology to exploit the people more repressively, more extensively, and more intensively. Sorry? To maximise profit, that's right. Sorry? Not for all. Profit is by definition not for all.
Trickles down.
No, on the contrary.
Down.
Profit, the argument he says is an exact summary of the argument, the theoretical argument. However, a World Bank report only a couple of years ago published a detailed study of the entire world's economy for the last 15, 20 years. And they showed there is no trickle-down effect. None.
Oh, come now. Oh, come now.
In the world, people are richer
You've
now.
now got India.
Are they? Are they?
Yeah.
In the United States of
I'm not talking about
America,
the United States of America.
In
I'm
the
talking
United
about the world. China, India, the world.
the fact of the matter is,
Yes, well said,
the overwhelming majority of the change in the economic condition of the majority of the world has happened in China.
Yeah.
Nearly the over 80% of poverty reduction in the world in the last 30 years happened in China.
And that's why I said
80%.
Because of capitalism.
80% happened in China.
Yes, yes.
However, China is dominated by public ownership. The banks are publicly owned, the big industries are publicly owned, telecommunications is publicly owned,
At the moment.
transportation is publicly owned.
At the moment.
Has been throughout those 30 years.
At the moment, but they
However,
trade through a capitalist
the opposite
open
is not the
market
case.
effect.
Take the United States of America. In the United States of America, instead of one person working in a family and earning enough for the whole family, now both people work. Man and woman both work to earn the same wages as one person used to earn.
And no, it's also because
Because
China and India
not because of immigration.
do things cheaper.
Immigration is a boon to the economy. Is a boon to the economy when the economy is expanding. When the economy is contracting, suddenly everyone's pointing at the immigrants.
But prices are going down because of cheap produce made in China and India and around the world. That's why people have, one reason why people have to work harder, because the competition on a global scale.
My friend,
Not about
prices are what going down?
Prices for products are going down because of competition for low-wage international markets.
Well,
Who make them like China,
actually, that's not really
like
true.
China.
That's a mythology. It's an understandable mythology, but it's not really true. For example, China, wages in China have consistently risen. They are not poverty wages in China as a general rule. Sorry?
30 years.
Yes?
Yeah, I'm talking
That's the
about
period you're
last-
talking about.
No, I'm talking about the last 70 years.
But then China wasn't involved in that.
Yeah, it was, because everything
China
was being
barely participated in the world market at that time. Barely, before 1976, China barely participated in the world market. Any case, thank you very much for listening. See you next week.
Even though you're talking
You have some stains on your badges, mate. What? You have some stains on the badges. You know the stars.
well said, well said.
Now tell us how many people rely on kitchen soap and food bags? How many people rely on the kitchen?
Too many, you're right.
Yeah, why? Why?
Because of aggressive capitalism. You're right, you're absolutely right. No, that's a good point.
Go back 40 years ago, people did, so things actually got worse.
Come take over everything from your humanity.
Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
The foundation.
Your foundation, you prove a point. That's I'm not foundation.
Oh, Silla, come on. Silla, come on. Oh my gosh. Okay. What's this one? What's this one? Okay. Al-Hajj. No, but Al-Hajj. 36. Yeah, this is Al-Hajj. Yeah, that's chapter 22. Yeah, verse 36. And the camel. And